Welcome to the Book Talk podcast.
Hello, everyone, where we explore the world's most influential books, one conversation at a time. I'm Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here.
Hi, Sophia. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you. And you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion.
Me too. I think today's book has the power to change the way people think about mental toughness and pushing past their limits.
I couldn't agree more. It's one of those books everyone should read at least once.
Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to Book Talk Podcast.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a like and share it with your friends and family. Your support helps us bring you more great book discussions every week.
It really means a lot to us. Thank you for being here.
All right, Sophia. Are you ready?
I'm ready. So what book are we discussing today?
Today we're discussing Can't Hurt Me. Master Your Mind and Defy the Odds by David Goggins.
Great choice. Let's dive in and discover how this book has helped millions of people break through mental barriers and unlock their true potential. So I want you, the listener, to really think about the absolute physical or mental limit you feel right now in your life.
Yeah, that exact moment where you feel completely burned out.
Right. Your tank is just completely empty, and every single fiber of your being is telling you to just quit.
We all know that feeling.
Exactly. But what if I told you that your brain is... well, it's actually actively lying to you. What if that absolute limit you are feeling, that massive wall of exhaustion, is actually only 40% of your true capability?
It is a profoundly disruptive concept, honestly. Just this idea that we are all walking around with a massive 60% reservoir of untapped potential.
Yeah, just locked away behind this psychological firewall.
Right. And unlocking that vault, it requires a complete paradigm shift. Today, we are looking at a real blueprint for unshackling the mind, stripping away the victim mentality, and accessing that hidden reserve.
But, I think we need to set the parameters of this deep dive immediately. Because if anyone is tuning in right now expecting a warm, comforting, rah-rah motivational seminar, well, this material is going to be a massive shock to the system.
Oh, absolutely.
Goggins explicitly argues that motivation is, frankly, practically useless.
Yeah, because motivation is just an emotional state.
Right.
And emotional states are inherently volatile.
Right.
Motivation might get you out of bed on a sunny Tuesday when you've had, 8 hours of sleep and a great cup of coffee.
Right.
But it completely vanishes at 3 in the morning when you are freezing, exhausted, and facing this seemingly insurmountable obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
Motivation doesn't actually alter your neurobiology.
But discipline does. And that's really what this deep dive is about today, the mechanics of discipline. It is about confronting incredibly dark, uncomfortable truths about our own default behaviors and fundamentally rewiring our neural pathways through, intentional voluntary friction.
Yes.
So whether you are navigating a massive career transition right now or trying to reclaim your physical health or just feeling stuck in a rut, the extreme physical crucibles we are going to explore today really serve as the ultimate metaphors for our everyday mental battles.
Definitely. And to understand how those mental battles are won, we really have to examine the environment where the battlefield was initially poured. Because the foundation of Goggins' operating system, it wasn't built in a military academy.
No, not at all.
It was forged in a completely terrifying domestic war zone.
Yeah, we have to rewind all the way back to 1981 to Williamsville, New York. And if you were driving through this neighborhood back then, you would see what looked like the absolute pinnacle of the American dream.
Right, the perfect picture.
Exactly. The streets are lined with doctors, lawyers, executives, and sitting right there, prominently on a corner lot on Paradise Road, is the Goggins family home.
The cognitive dissonance of that street name, Paradise Road, it's just staggering when you look at the empirical reality of what was actually happening behind those nice white wooden walls.
It was literally a chamber of horrors. His father, Toughness Goggins, he projected this image of a highly successful, self-made businessman. He drove a Rolls Royce, he had a Mercedes and a Corvette parked right in the driveway.
Yeah, the optics were flawless.
But inside, Toughness was a tyrant. He ran his household through systematic terror-based control.
Right. He owned a roller skating rink in East Buffalo called Skateland. And to the patrons, it was this shiny, fun, disco-funk wonderland. But to 6-year-old David, his mother Jackie, and his brother, Skateland was basically a forced labor camp.
Yeah.
Toughness controlled the entire family's existence through extreme financial and physical abuse.
The sensory details in the book are just, well, they really anchor the trauma. You have little David, who's so small he has to stand on a wooden step stool just to reach the counter.
Right.
And he is tasked with spraying industrial aerosol deodorizer into hundreds of returned roller skates, shift after grueling shift. He talks about his eyes being permanently bloodshot, the harsh chemical stink just embedding itself in his nasal passages, working super deep into the night.
It's the little kid.
Right. And his mother is trapped at the cash register, entirely dependent on a man who refused to let her have a bank account or even a credit card. All while Trinus Sr. just surveyed the entire operation from the DJ booth.
It is really a textbook study in absolute authoritarian control. I mean, he isolated them financially, socially, and emotionally. And the enforcement mechanism for that control was horrific physical violence.
It's hard to even talk about.
It is. Trinus utilized a thick leather belt, forcing David to strip down and lie in a bed in a darkened room, which, effectively strips away the child's ability to even brace for the impact because he couldn't see the belt coming in the dark.
It was clearly designed to maximize psychological terror. And there is this one specific memory that perfectly encapsulates the baseline level of fear in that environment.
Yeah, the office scene.
Exactly. David is 6 years old, trying to catch some sleep on a small sofa in the Skateland back office, while the bass from the skating floor is literally vibrating the ceiling tiles above him. Trinus walks in, reaches right under the exact cushion where David's head is resting, and pulls out a loaded handgun.
Just unbelievable.
He flashes it at the child, slides it into an ankle holster, and just walks back out.
Imagine the physiological response occurring in his 6-year-old's body in that exact moment.
But, even amidst that sheer terror, we see the very first flashes of the defiance that would later define him.
We really do.
Like when Trinus was violently beating Jackie, literally dragging her down a staircase by her hair, little David actually jumped onto his father's back.
Wow.
Yeah, throwing punches, actively trying to physically stop this towering, terrifying man.
And Goggins later observed that in that specific instance, his hatred temporarily overrode his fear. But, as we know, relying on adrenaline and hatred is not a sustainable survival strategy for a developing child.
No, it absolutely breaks you down over time. Right. So his mother eventually orchestrated an escape. She secured a secret credit card with the help of a neighbor, loaded her kids into a broken-down Volvo, and fled across the country to Brazil, Indiana.
But relocating geographically does not relocate you psychologically. Escaping the immediate proximity of the abuser, well, it doesn't erase the physiological damage that the abuse has already inflicted.
And the environment in Indiana offered absolutely no sanctuary. I mean, they initially found a semblance of stability with a man named Wilmoth, who stepped in as this protective father figure.
Yeah, he taught David basketball, brought a rare sense of peace to their lives.
But that fragile peace was completely shattered when Wilmoth was murdered, shot to death in his own garage.
It is just an incomprehensible layering of trauma for a kid. And compounding that grief was the systemic, overt racism of Brazil, Indiana in the 1980s and 90s.
Right.
We are looking at an environment where the Ku Klux Klan was actively marching in neighboring towns. David actually had a firearm pulled on him by a local resident on a dark country road.
It's just terrifying. He endured racial slurs spray-painted onto his car and literal death threats written directly into his school workbooks.
Let's examine the clinical neurobiology of what this does to a human being, because I think it's important for the listener to grasp this. We often use the term toxic stress casually, but in neurodevelopmental terms, it describes a very specific, devastating cascade.
Exactly.
When a child is exposed to chronic, unrelenting adversity, domestic violence, profound poverty, systemic racism, the murder of a guardian, the brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, becomes completely hyper-reactive.
The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, is essentially stuck in the on position. The brain actually believes it is under constant mortal threat, so it continuously floods the central nervous system with cortisol and adrenaline.
And chronic cortisol exposure is neurotoxic to a developing brain. It physically impairs the architecture of the prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for executive function, emotional regulation, and complex learning. So the brain is literally deprioritizing reading comprehension and memory formation in order to allocate all available resources to scanning the environment for the next physical threat.
Which perfectly explains the severe physiological and cognitive symptoms that young David developed. This wasn't just a child who was, distracted in class.
No, not at all.
His hair was falling out in patches. He developed a severe, debilitating stutter. His brain was so structurally overwhelmed by the mandate to survive that he developed crippling learning disabilities. He would stare at a textbook and be biologically incapable of retaining the information.
And this brings us to a really fascinating sociological crossroad. Because when an individual is dealt a hand with this much trauma, society generally offers a blanket pass.
Yeah, we really do.
We look at the abuse, the neurological deficits, the poverty, the racism, and if that individual fails to launch, the consensus is usually, well, we cannot blame them. Look at what they were up against.
It is the ultimate justification for failure. And, initially, Goggins accepted that pass. He recognized that the path of least resistance was to just lean into the trauma.
Right,
He
yeah.
learned how to cheat systemically just to pass his classes. He began acting out, projecting this false, aggressive exterior to mask his internal terror. And he effectively became the exact stereotype that the racist in his community expected him to be.
He adopted a strategy of invisibility, really. He would sag his pants and install massive subwoofers in his car, creating this loud, intimidating aura. But all while actively hiding in the back of classrooms, terrified a teacher might call on him and expose his inability to read.
He fully embraced the identity of the victim.
He did. And the critical distinction we have to make here is that he actually was a victim.
Right, the trauma was real.
Objectively real. The abuse happened. The systemic racism was undeniable. The turning point in his cognitive evolution was not denying that the trauma occurred. The turning point was realizing that weaponizing his victimhood as an excuse for mediocrity was ultimately going to destroy his life.
Which leads us right to the catalyst for his transformation. So, fast forward a few years. Goggins is a young adult, and his reality is bleak.
Yeah, very big.
He weighs nearly 300 pounds. He is working a dead-end night shift for Ecolab, making maybe $1,000 a month spraying restaurants for cockroaches.
Rough.
And his daily routine consists of finishing his shift, hitting a Steak and Shake drive-thru for a massive chocolate milkshake, and then stopping at a 7-Eleven for a box of mini donuts just to eat in front of the television.
He had reached the absolute nadir of his existence. He was a prisoner of his own comfort-seeking behaviors.
Until a random television broadcast interrupts his downward spiral. He sees a documentary on Navy SEAL buds, the basic underwater demolition and SEAL training.
Right.
He watches these men enduring freezing surf, carrying boats on their heads, pushing through unimaginable physical misery, and a spark just ignites. He decides in that very moment that he wants to be one of them.
But the delta between a 300-pound exterminator and a Navy SEAL is functionally astronomical. I mean, he attempts to start training. He laces up his shoes, steps outside, and tries to run.
And he makes it exactly 400 yards.
Yeah.
His heart rate spikes dangerously. He is dizzy. His joints are screaming, and he is forced to quit. He retreats back to his living room, sits on the couch right next to his milkshake, and just breaks down in tears.
That is the exact moment where most human beings allow their psychological immune system to take over.
Exactly.
The ego rushes in to protect us from the pain of our own inadequacy. It offers rationalizations, right? Like, oh, I have a heavy bone structure, or
Yeah.
I had a traumatic childhood, or, well, the military isn't for me anyway.
But Goggins forcefully bypassed those ego defenses. Instead of leaning into the rationalizations, he walked into his bathroom, wiped the condensation off the mirror, and invented a psychological tool he calls the accountability mirror.
Such a powerful concept.
It really is. He stared directly at his 300-pound reflection and initiated a process of radical, brutal honesty.
He verbally assaulted his own excuses. He looked at himself and said, "You are fat. You are uneducated. You are a liar. And nobody is coming to save you."
When I look at the mechanics of the accountability mirror, I equate it to a ruthless corporate audit.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Right. If a Fortune 500 company is hemorrhaging capital and on the verge of bankruptcy, an external auditing firm does not walk into the boardroom and say, hey, don't be too hard on yourselves. Everyone is trying their best.
No, not at all.
They bring a spreadsheet highlighting the exact systemic failures, the bloated departments, the toxic assets. Goggins basically performed a hostile audit on his own soul.
That is a phenomenal framework for it.
Yeah.
Because what an audit does is establish an empirical baseline. You cannot navigate out of a crisis if you are lying about your starting coordinates.
Exactly.
By accepting the raw data, by acknowledging that he was deeply out of shape and academically severely behind, he removed the massive cognitive load of maintaining the illusion. The truth hurts, but it is incredibly clarifying.
So he took out a stack of Post-it notes and began writing down his macro and micro goals, sticking them directly onto the glass. Initially, it was just basic compliance, make your bed, shave your head, pull up your pants.
Right, small steps.
Then it escalated to things like lose 2 pounds this week. Every single morning, he forced himself to stand in front of that mirror and answer to those notes.
And the execution required to meet those goals was staggering. To even qualify for the opportunity to attend SEAL training, he had to lose over 100 pounds in less than 90 days.
Which is an aggressive, practically medically dangerous rate of weight loss.
Absolutely.
It was fueled by hours on a stationary hike, swimming, and severe caloric restriction. But the physical transformation was really only half the battle, because he also had to pass the ASVAB, which is the military's standardized aptitude test.
And this is where the neurodevelopmental deficits from his childhood presented a massive roadblock. Because of the toxic stress and the resulting learning disabilities we talked about, he could not simply read a textbook, synthesize the concepts, and recall them. The traditional neural pathways for learning were just damaged.
So he engineered a workaround using extreme mechanical repetition. He realized that if he couldn't absorb the information conceptually, he would literally hammer it into his brain physically.
Yeah.
He sat at his kitchen table with his ASVAB study guides and empty spiral notebooks, and he would transcribe the textbooks word for word, page by page.
And when a notebook was full, he would just start a fresh one and write the entire textbook out again. He did this over and over until the sheer physical repetition forced the information to adhere to his memory.
From a neuroplasticity standpoint, this is remarkable. I mean, the brain is malleable. When the primary neural highway is blocked by trauma, Goggins essentially used a machete to hack a brand new path through the jungle.
That's a great way to put it.
By writing those words thousands of times, he forced the myelination of new synaptic connections. He built a new learning pathway through sheer, unadulterated friction.
He passed the test, he dropped the weight, and he secured his contract for the military. But gaining admission to the military was really merely acquiring a ticket to the real crucible.
Oh, yeah. That was just the starting line.
Exactly. Because overcoming a cognitive deficit at a kitchen table is one thing, but overcoming the catastrophic physical pain of Navy SEAL BUDS training requires an entirely different psychological architecture.
Which introduces the core philosophy of his military career, the concept of callousing the mind. Let's frame the reality of his BUDS experience for a second. Navy SEAL training includes a multi-day, sleep-deprived nightmare known as Hell Week.
Just brutal.
It's designed specifically to weed out the weak, and Goggins didn't just endure Hell Week once. Due to severe, debilitating injuries, including running on a fractured kneecap, he was rolled back and forced to endure Hell Week 3 separate times.
The psychological fortitude required to voluntarily re-enter an arena of known, agonizing pain is difficult to overstate. He knew exactly how much the freezing surf hurt. He knew exactly what it felt like to hallucinate from sleep deprivation, and he chose to walk back in.
So how does the human nervous system adapt to that? Well, Goggins looked at his hands, which were covered in thick, hard calluses from lifting weights.
Right.
He recognized the biological mechanism of hyperkeratosis. When skin is subjected to constant friction against a steel bar, the body responds by rapidly generating a dense, protective layer of cells. The friction that damages the soft tissue is the exact stimulus that signals the body to build armor.
He realized that the human brain operates on the exact same biological principle. The default state of the mind is soft. Is biologically wired to seek comfort, warmth, and a caloric surplus.
Of course.
But by subjecting the mind to voluntary controlled friction, like running in a freezing rainstorm when you want to stay in bed or choosing the harder physical task every single day, you force the brain to construct a protective psychological layer. You build resilience against the unavoidable suffering of life.
He built mental armor. But he didn't just use this armor to endure the suffering. He figured out how to weaponize it against his environment. Which brings us to a psychological strategy he calls taking souls.
This is a masterclass in asymmetrical psychological warfare.
It really is. So the scene is BUDS during a brutal evolution known as surf torture. The recruits of Boat Crew 2, including Goggins, are sitting arm in arm in the freezing Pacific Ocean. The water temperature is plummeting, waves are crashing violently over their heads.
It's awful.
And the instructors, 2 notoriously hard men known as Psycho and SBG, have targeted the specific crew. They are applying maximum pressure, just waiting for someone to break, start shivering, and ring the bell to quit.
And we really have to understand the objective of the instructors here. They are not merely trying to fatigue the muscles. They are trying to induce a parasympathetic collapse.
Right.
They want the recruits' minds to surrender to the inevitability of the pain. They want them to believe the misery is permanent.
But right at the absolute inflection point of suffering, when everyone expects a breakdown, Goggins initiates a radical behavioral override. He starts humming.
Yeah, this part is amazing.
He leads his freezing, battered boat crew in humming the theme song to the movie Platoon. And then they start smiling.
It is a complete subversion of the expected power dynamic.
The instructors are stunned. Goggins discovered that when you are at your lowest possible point and an adversary or an authority figure is entirely confident that they have broken you, looking them in the eye and displaying undeniable excellence and defiance completely shatters their psychological momentum.
And the biochemistry of this tactic is profound. When an individual feels defeated, their cortisol levels peak and dopamine crashes. But by actively choosing defiance, by taking the instructor's souls, Goggins triggered a massive surge in his sympathetic nervous system.
It's like a chemical switch flipped.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The psychological victory released a flood of adrenaline and noradrenaline. It is the neurochemical mechanism behind a second wind. The temperature of the water didn't change at all, but his brain's interpretation of the threat was completely rewritten by his assertion of dominance.
The beauty of this concept is how seamlessly it maps onto everyday professional and personal challenges for the listener. You know, you don't need to be sitting in the Pacific Ocean to take a soul. Think about a manager who actively doubts your competence, or a professor who has written you off as a mediocre student. Much like the teachers who wanted to place a young Goggins in special education.
Taking a soul in the civilian world is about leveraging that doubt as fuel for undeniable execution. You don't take a soul by arguing or filing a complaint. You take it by arriving earlier than they do, working with more precision than they thought possible, and delivering results that are so flawless they force a cognitive reset in your adversary's mind.
Yes.
You crush their skepticism with an overwhelming application of excellence.
I really love that framing. Crushing skepticism with overwhelming excellence. But, you know, Goggins eventually ran out of external adversaries, he mastered the art of defeating instructors, but his ultimate evolutionary leap occurred when he was entirely alone, battling the limits of his own biology.
This is the transition from conquering the external environment to conquering the internal source code.
Which brings us to the San Diego one-day race. This is a 24-hour, 100-mile ultra-marathon, and the context here is vital. Several of Goggins' military brothers were tragically killed in Operation Red Wings in Afghanistan. He wanted to raise money for the Special Operations Warrior Foundation by running the Badwater 135, which is one of the most grueling races on the planet. But to even qualify for Badwater, the race organizers demanded he first run 100 miles in 24 hours.
And we must emphasize his physical state at this time. He was a 250-plus-pound powerlifter. He possessed immense fast-twitch muscle power, but he had engaged in zero cardiovascular ultra-endurance training.
None. Zero. He literally shows up to a 1-mile loop track in San Diego with a canvas folding chair, a box of Ritz crackers, some nutritional shakes, and a body fundamentally unconditioned for the biomechanics of a 100-mile run.
And the physical devastation he experiences is catastrophic. By the time he reaches mile 70, his body is initiating systemic shutdowns.
It's terrifying to read.
It is. The small bones in his feet, the metatarsals, have sustained stress fractures. His kidneys are failing due to the immense muscular breakdown, causing him to urinate dark blood. He collapses into the folding chair, wraps a blanket around himself, and finds that his neuromuscular system is refusing to fire. He cannot physically stand up.
He is locked in a prison of unimaginable agony. But sitting in that chair, staring down the barrel of 30 more miles, he arrives at the most important physiological and psychological discovery of his life. The 40% rule.
This is a concept that perfectly mirrors one of the most prominent frameworks in modern sports science, known as the central governor theory.
Exactly. Originally proposed by Dr. Tim Noakes, the central governor theory fundamentally changed how we view exhaustion. For decades, the assumption was that fatigue was purely mechanical, that your muscles simply ran out of ATP, the cellular energy currency, and seized up like a car running out of gas.
But Noakes argued, and Goggins discovered anecdotally in that chair, that the brain intervenes long before mechanical failure actually occurs. The brain functions as a highly conservative governor. Its primary evolutionary mandate is not high performance, it is survival.
And from an evolutionary biology perspective, this makes perfect sense. If a hunter-gatherer depleted 100% of their energy chasing an antelope, they would have zero reserves left to fight off a predator on the walk back to camp or to survive a sudden drop in temperature.
Right.
The brain is hardwired to keep a massive emergency reserve in the tank.
So when you hit that wall, when your lungs are burning, your legs feel like lead, and your internal monologue is screaming at you in a state of absolute panic to stop. That is not your body reaching its physical limit.
No, not at all.
That is simply the brain's governor deploying a neurological illusion of pain to force you to conserve energy. Goggins realized that when you feel you've given everything you have, you are actually only operating at roughly 40% of your maximum physiological capacity.
Now, we do have to contextualize the extreme nature of his specific situation. Pushing to the point of renal failure and shattered bones is the absolute jagged edge of human survival. I mean, he was overriding the governor to a degree that was highly medically dangerous.
Very dangerous, yeah.
But the underlying lesson for the rest of us is deeply practical.
The lesson is recognizing the false stock sign. When you are 2 hours into deep focus work and your brain suddenly insists you need to check your phone or go to sleep, or when you're in the gym and your mind begs you to drop the weight at rep 8 instead of 10, that is the governor.
Right, it's that voice.
The objective is not to destroy your physical health. The objective is to realize that the initial wave of fatigue is a negotiation, not a mandate. Pushing just 5% or 10% past that initial desire to quit is how you systematically stretch your baseline capacity over time.
It's about recalibrating the brain's alarm system, but recognizing the governor is only a theoretical understanding. The visceral, mechanical problem remains. When you are at that 40% wall, when the pain is blinding and your brain is actively flooding your system with panic signals, how do you biologically override that signal in real time?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. How do you force a body that cannot stand up to run 30 more miles?
You require a highly potent cognitive intervention. And Goggins developed a tool for this precise moment, which he calls the cookie jar.
Let's transport back to that folding chair at mile 70. He is shivering, his kidneys are failing, and the sheer magnitude of the remaining 30 miles is crushing him. To break the paralysis, he reached into his memory.
Yeah, he dug deep.
He recalled his childhood in Indiana, living in deep poverty, and the profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude and joy he felt on the rare occasions his mother would bring home a jar of actual cookies.
He took that visceral emotional memory and repurposed it. He constructed a mental cookie jar, but instead of physical treats, he stocked it with every major victory, every overcome trauma, and every impossible obstacle he had successfully navigated in his life.
When he was sitting in that chair, the default mode network of his brain was trapped in a catastrophic negative feedback loop. It was fixated entirely on the deficit, the pain, the blood, the impossible distance left. The cookie jar is a mechanism to violently interrupt that loop.
Instead of looking forward at the 30 miles, he reached into the jar and looked backward. He pulled out a cookie, surviving the terrifying beatings from his father in Buffalo. He pulled out another, sitting at that kitchen table, bypassing his learning disability to pass the ASVAB.
Yeah, all those hard-won victories.
Another cookie, losing 100 pounds in 3 months. Another, surviving Hell Week 3 times on broken legs.
From a neurochemical perspective, recalling specific hard-fought past successes triggers a targeted release of dopamine. We often think of dopamine merely as the reward chemical, but it is fundamentally a molecule of motivation and motor control.
Exactly.
By vividly recalling his past badassery, he provided his brain with the exact chemical currency required to override the amygdala's panic signals. He used the memory of his past triumphs as kindling to spark a massive fire of immediate motivation.
He generated enough neurochemical momentum to literally stand up out of that chair. And he didn't just walk, he ran. He finished the 100 miles and then pushed to 101 miles just to prove to his governor who was entirely in control.
The brilliance of the cookie jar is its universal accessibility. You do not need a Navy SEAL trident to build one. Everyone listening to this deep dive right now possesses a cookie jar.
Oh, absolutely.
Securing a college degree while working 2 minimum wage jobs is a massive cookie. Breaking the generational cycle of a toxic family dynamic is a cookie. Getting out of bed and going to work during a period of suffocating clinical depression is an incredibly potent cookie.
The purpose of the jar is to maintain an empirical inventory of your own resilience. In moments of extreme duress, the brain will try to convince you that you are weak and that failure is inevitable.
It's such a liar.
It is. The cookie jar provides undeniable historical data to the contrary. It proves to your brain that you have navigated the dark before, and you can navigate it again.
But what happens when you apply the formula perfectly? You utilize the cookie jar, you override the 40% governor, you invest 100% of your physical and spiritual energy into a goal, and you still fail.
Yeah.
And you don't just fail in private, you fail on a massive, humiliating public stage.
This explores a critical dimension of the Goggins philosophy, the empowerment of failure.
We look at his attempt to break the Guinness World Record for the most pull-ups completed in 24 hours. This wasn't a quiet gym session. He attempted this on live national television, on the Today Show.
Right in front of everybody.
The stakes, the spotlight, and the pressure were astronomical.
And he failed. Not once, but twice, across 2 separate broadcast attempts. The physical damage was grotesque. The friction of the bar literally tore the skin and tissue off his hands down to the bone. And he once again induced rhabdomyolysis.
For those unfamiliar with the pathology of rhabdomyolysis, it highlights the extreme danger of his efforts. When you push muscles to the point of structural failure, the necrotic muscle tissue breaks down and releases a protein called myoglobin into the bloodstream.
It's very bad news.
Right. Myoglobin molecules are massive. When they reach the kidneys for filtration, it is the equivalent of trying to flush golf balls down a narrow, fragile pipe. They clog, tear, and destroy the renal system. That is the level of biological breakdown he was enduring, and he still fell hundreds of pull-ups short of the record.
And the cultural blowback was immediate. Because he failed publicly, the internet trolls descended. They analyzed his mechanics, criticized his body weight, mocked his failure, and demanded he quit.
Society generally offers 2 default pathways when we fail. The first is the path of surrender. We internalize the failure, let it define our identity, and retreat.
Right.
The second is the route of toxic positivity. We brush it off, claim it just wasn't meant to be, and deliberately avoid thinking about the painful details so we can protect our feelings.
Goggins rejected both. He treated his failure with a cold, analytical detachment of a military operation. He conducted an after-action report, or an AAR.
The AAR is essentially a cognitive behavioral therapy tool masquerading as a military debrief. It is the process of putting your failure on an autopsy table. You strip away the emotion, the shame, and the ego, and you clinically dissect the corpse of the attempt to see exactly what killed it.
An AAR asks 3 ruthless questions. What went right? What went wrong? And what was the exact state of my mindset?
When he analyzed the data objectively, he realized his cardiovascular stamina and muscular endurance were not the points of failure. That went right.
Yeah.
What went wrong were the mechanical variables, the friction profile of the pull-up bar, and the specific gloves he wore, which bunched up and destroyed his grip.
And crucially, he audited his mindset. He recognized that he allowed his ego to tie his success to a specific, highly publicized calendar date. The pressure of the live television broadcast had contaminated his internal focus.
By treating the failure as raw data rather than an indictment of his identity, he was able to recalibrate. He decoupled the goal from the arbitrary pressure of the calendar date. He engineered a specific, customized grip system to mitigate the friction.
He took control of the variables.
He removed the television cameras, and on his 3rd attempt, operating with clinical precision, he absolutely obliterated the record, completing 4,030 pull-ups in 17 hours.
It is the ultimate proof that failure, when stripped of emotional baggage, is simply the high-resolution blueprint for your eventual success.
He had reached the absolute zenith of human performance. Navy SEAL, Army Ranger Honor Man, world record holder, elite, ultra-endurance athlete. He had constructed an impenetrable armor of physical and mental dominance, but the bill for decades of extreme physical trauma eventually comes due.
The body invariably keeps the score.
It does. Despite his supreme conditioning, his body begins to systemically fail. He develops bizarre, crippling muscular knots. He is diagnosed with a congenital heart defect, an atrial septal defect, which is essentially a hole in his heart that he had remarkably been operating with his entire career.
It's crazy to even think about.
Right. He ends up immobilized in a hospital bed, undergoing multiple heart surgeries.
This is the most profound inflection point in his psychological journey. For decades, his primary coping mechanism for the trauma of his youth was forward motion. He managed the pain by punishing himself physically, by constantly seeking the next crucible.
Without running it.
Exactly. But immobilized in that hospital bed, stripped of his ability to run or lift, he was finally forced into silence. He had to sit alone with his own mind.
And in that forced stillness, the ultimate epiphany arrived. He realized that the David Goggins persona, the unstoppable, calloused warrior, was, in part, an incredibly elaborate defense mechanism.
Wow.
His entire life of ultra-endurance was a way of running away from the terrified, abused kid he used to be back on Paradise Road.
He had to confront the reality that he was still fighting the ghosts of Williamsville. And the only way to truly master his mind was to stop fighting them and start accepting them.
This requires a radical reframing of the narrative. He didn't just forgive his past, he repurposed it. He realized that David Goggins, the crushing poverty, the overt racism, the learning disabilities, all of those horrific elements were not a curse.
No, they were fuel.
They were the custom-forged resistance training required to build his greatness. Without the devil in Buffalo, there is no Navy SEAL, there is no world record.
By accepting that his deepest traumas were the exact raw materials of his strength, he achieved a state of peace. The anger that had fueled him for so long finally dissipated.
But finding peace introduces a dangerous new variable. When the anger is gone and the records are set, how do you prevent the ego from returning? How do you prevent complacency from making you soft?
That's the real try.
Right. Which brings us to the final critical piece of his operating system, the philosophy of starting at zero.
He adapted this concept from his time in Army Ranger School. In that environment, the hierarchy of the outside world is erased. It doesn't matter if you are a highly decorated officer or a brand new enlisted private. Everyone is stripped of their rank.
Everyone is equal.
You're all equally worthless, and you're all required to prove your value on the ground, in the mud, right now. No one cares what you achieved yesterday.
Goggins took that military framework and applied it to his daily existence. It mirrors the Zen Buddhist concept of Shoshin, or beginner's mind. No matter how many millions of books you've sold, no matter how many ultramarathons you've won, the moment your feet hit the floor in the morning, the scoreboard is wiped clean.
Clean slate.
You must approach every single day as if it is day one, week one, and you have achieved absolutely nothing.
It is the ultimate defense mechanism against arrogance.
Yeah.
Because arrogance implies you have arrived, and when you think you have arrived, neuroplasticity stops. You stop adapting, you stop growing, and you begin to decay.
You know, when I first encountered this, it seemed like a glaring contradiction to the cookie jar. We established that the cookie jar requires you to meticulously curate and remember your past victories to draw strength from them.
Right.
But starting at zero demands that you aggressively forget your past victories and pretend you are nobody. How do those two concepts coexist in the same brain?
It's a brilliant paradox, and they actually function together in perfect symbiosis. It is a matter of strategic timing. The cookie jar is a tactical weapon you deploy during the firefight.
Okay.
When you are deep in the arena, when the pain is overwhelming and the governor is screaming at you to quit, you reach into the cookie jar for the immediate neurochemical fuel required to survive the moment.
So the cookie jar is for the middle of the battle.
Precisely. But starting at zero is the overarching strategic posture you must adopt before the battle ever begins. It is the deep humility required when the alarm goes off at 4 in the morning.
Right. I see.
If you wake up thinking about how many cookies you have in your jar, you will roll over and go back to sleep. Starting at zero ensures you tie your shoes and put in the brutal, unglamorous work required to actually earn the right to place another cookie in the jar.
That synthesis is incredibly powerful. One philosophy keeps you hard when you want to quit, and the other keeps you humble when you want to coast. Let's pull all of these threads together for you, the listener. Today, we have mapped a comprehensive blueprint for neuroplasticity and self-mastery.
We really have.
We explored the accountability mirror, bypassing the ego's defenses to audit our true baseline. We examined callousing the mind through voluntary friction. We demystified the 40% rule, and the central governor learning to push past the brain's false stop signs.
And we learned to weaponize dopamine with the cookie jar.
Exactly. Extract data from failure via after-action reports and maintain our edge by starting at zero.
It is an operating system that requires absolute, relentless, daily execution.
And we want to leave you with one final paradigm-shifting thought to carry with you today. Goggins reached his ultimate potential only when he realized that his deepest traumas were actually the ultimate training ground for his greatness. So, look at the biggest obstacle, the most frustrating limitation, or the deepest source of pain in your life right now.
What if you stopped viewing that pain as a burden?
What if you started viewing it as the precise, custom-built resistance training you need to remove your governor?
What if the thing you hate the most is the exact stimulus you need to unlock the other 60% of your potential?
Mastering your mind and defying the odds starts with facing that resistance head-on. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive. If you found value in today's discussion and are ready to tackle your own 40% wall, please give this video a like and make sure you subscribe to the Book Talk podcast so you never miss a conversation.
And we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us which mental toughness tip from David Goggins you are going to apply to your life this week. Is it the accountability mirror, the cookie jar, or the 40% rule? Also, let us know what book you think we should feature next. Please share this deep dive with anyone who might need a reminder of what they are truly capable of.
Your support helps us keep bringing you these deep dives. Until next time, stay tough, stay honest with yourself, and keep turning your obstacles into armor. We'll see you on the next Book Talk podcast.